In this paper, I want to examine how Hari Kunzru's use of contemporary multimodal literatures facilitates a dynamic movement through virtual and imagined spaces, which align with real-world physicalities. These movements, I suggest, can be usefully explored via Henri Lefebvre's concept of rhythm analysis, an engagement with movement through space and in space that is inherently multisensory. As recent geographic criticism has attempted to examine how Lefebvre's work can be opened up to contemporary debates around questions such as race, gender, and disability, I argue that Kunzru's work offers a distinct use of rhythmic movement through space to advance a cultural imaginary that intervenes in discrete notions of cultural identity in favour of a productive hybridity. Such literary presence can be described by the term Transglossic, a new term developed by myself and Christian Shaw to describe the movement across formal positions, which defines contemporary cultural production. Contemporary British writer Hari Kunzru is best known as a novelist. His novels can be broadly termed as postmodern, in that they explore themes of contemporary debate such as selfhood, identity, and the role of technology, alongside generic inventiveness. The two texts that I want to discuss today are lesser-known works. Twice Upon a Time in New York is an experimental ebook published by Atavist Books in 2013, a collage of autobiographical texts by Kunzru, photographs, and typographical word art. It takes the reader on a walk through New York to a soundtrack of city noises, words appearing on the pages through swipe functions to generate an immersive experience. When Atavist folded, the sound version of the text was lost, the Atavist app no longer supported by operating system updates. Even Kunzru himself no longer has the complete text, and all that remains are two different versions of the physical text. Memory Palace was also published in 2013 and was created as part of a collaborative project with the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. A physical gallery exhibition was combined with a printed text in which the artists' concept drawings for their exhibition pieces were reproduced, interspersed by a fantasy text written by Kunzru in which an unnamed narrator exists in a dystopian future London. In both these instances, Kunzru is concerned to create an experience of movement. In Twice Upon a Time, the reader is invited to walk with Kunzru through the streets of New York. The digital format of the text means that it exists as a portable guide which one might walk either through New York itself or through another physical space, with the text soundtrack playing through headphones. Likewise, Memory Palace is constructed with the aim of giving readers a textual version of the physical experience of the exhibition. The curator's choice of Kunzru was motivated by his elusive fictional landscapes that might echo the non-linearity of the physical exhibition space. The text begins with a description of memory palaces, which are a common technique for improving memory. The suggestion that memory is rooted in physical movement around a place that is then held in the mind so that, quote, you can tour it in your mind when you are not there. Henri Lefebvre's concept of rhythm analysis is a useful framework to explore such texts in which movement exists on the liminal border between real and imagined spaces. For Lefebvre, rhythms define our spatial situatedness. When we move both with rhythm and through rhythm. In their generic hybridity, I suggest, Kunzru evokes Lefebvre's description of rhythm analysis as that which can only be registered via fully corporeal engagement, which extends beyond any single sensory experience. No camera, no image or series of images can show these rhythms, writes Lefebvre. It requires equally attentive eyes and ears, a head and a memory and a heart. As Eldon discusses, for Lefebvre, the distinction between an analysis of rhythms and rhythm analysis lies in a practice in which the body serves as metronome, a tool as well as its first point of analysis. So Kunzru's Twice Upon a Time begins with reference to the narrator lying in bed to the sound of a mechanical timer, juxtaposed with their own thoughts that are a fusion of sights, sounds and smells, the orange light filtered through blinds, an unfamiliar smell, and the fused sounds of street noise, R&B playing in a car outside, and an unattributed laughter. These sensory fragments continue through the text. In the original multimedia text to be interspersed with recordings of the city, with movable images that would coalesce on the page as the user swiped. In between, blocks of conventional text, large print and stylized typography construct the rhythms of the narrator's movement through the city. One page in bold, stylized and underlined print reads simply, "Broken bottle smashes, argument by the benches, dog barking, honk rattle." An image of street writing is overlaid by large print text which reads, "Be a hobo and go with me." Later in the book, the bold text again marks auditory rhythms, but this time the words laid over one another to give the impression of synchronous sounds. The representation of a rhythm without sound is crucial to Lefebvre's concept, in which rhythm constitutes a vibration of space rather than audible sound. It is a tendency in criticism to consider Lefebvre's notion of rhythm as one which is about the subject that moves, or the movement of that subject through a physically moving space. Yet the focus on the body as tool reveals how it is nevertheless also the case that Lefebvre emphasizes rhythm as a material property of that which does not obviously move. His explicit dictate that we easily confuse rhythm with movement. In a later essay on the theme, The Rhythm and an Analytical Project, Lefebvre writes, "The surroundings of the body, the social just as much as the cosmic body, are equally bundles of rhythms. This meadow, this garden, these trees and these houses. You at once notice that every plant, every tree has its rhythm." In doing so, Lefebvre prefigures contemporary new materialist thinking, asking us to consider not only the mobility of the subject, but the inherent mobility of the space the subject moves through. In Memory Palace, the reader walks without walking, and the rhythms are those of the physical book, converted to a polyrhythmic space. By interweaving Kunzru's text with the visuals of multiple different artists, the novel destabilizes authorial presence in favour of multiple subjectivities. The commissioned images do not illustrate the text in conventional fashion, rather they serve as interlocutors that adjust the text's rhythm. The image text mimics the gallery in which rhythms shift with the encounter with each artwork. Here the slow rhythm of mock Renaissance painting bustles against the clipped rhythms of schematic drawings, the languorous rhythms of sketches and the fast paces of graphic art. This reflects Lefebvre's emphasis on the rhythm of the static object. The fast rhythm of dialogue sits on the page opposite the slow rhythm of a hand-drawn portrait. The cover of the book is an ornate gold leaf-inspired hardback published on premium paper, which engages with what can be seen as the movement towards a premium anti-digital text, as part of what is defined as bookishness. As Lydekker Plate has argued, this bookishness is interwoven with a material culture that establishes the book as an object which has a body. In Twice Upon a Time, this structural rejection of singularity is combined with a similar thematic focus, which is developed via the notion of complex rhythms. Interspersed with Kunzru's reflections on his own identification with New York is the story of 1960s New York musician Moondog, who is blinded at age 16 and whose career unfolds from being a street musician to an avant-garde performer connected to some of the most well-known experimental composers. The pages in the part of the book dealing with Moondog's blindness are plain brown backgrounds, suddenly stripping the reader of the visual explosions of the previous pages. The blind, Kunzru writes, develop an appreciation for precision, repetition, knowability. This view is resonant with the representation of sound within the discipline of sonic ecology, and its stress on sound as that which can productively denote space through its measurable patterns. Kunzru references how Moondog uses snake time rhythms of sevens, fives and nines, the musician's own name for what he describes as his unique sense of rhythmic style. Kunzru's comments on Moondog's approach to composition, the appearance of chaos but always carefully structured and scored, is also a comment on the book itself. There is, despite discontinuity, always a rhythm to the text. The repetition of words, the numbering of images, the recurring movement of pieces of text and of sound phrases. In this respect, Kunzru capitalizes upon the potential of rhythm to evoke spatio-temporal disruptions, a focus on rhythm as the articulation of a moment which, Lefebvre writes, cannot be captured in its multiplicity without the recollection of other moments and of all hours. That this space-time is one which relies upon memory explicitly draws us to Memory Palace, to the ways in which Kunzru's text rests upon a spatio-temporal disjunction. The narrative of Memory Palace eludes conventional temporality. The internet, readers are told, is a thing from before the withering. But the recourse to such mythical abstract framings is resonant with folklore. The very title of Twice Upon a Time, a quote from a line by Moondog, equally speaks to the concern of a single temporal moment in repetition. Multimodality is thus aligned with the multiscalar temporalities which rhythm analysis is so suited to interpret. Yet in keeping with the suggestion of Smith and Hetherington in a special issue devoted to urban rhythms, that it is not enough to document rhythms, one must also conduct a methodology which identifies their consequences. Such multimodal rhythms also provide an opportunity to examine how Lefebvre's work, while frequently related to white male subjects, has at its core a methodology which challenges the exclusion of difference. As a range of philosophers from Derrida to Deleuze to Jean-Luc Nancy have argued, to defy singular sensory experience is to open up the space of the other. As readers are taken through Kunzru's text, they move with and encounter within the text spaces a polyrhythmia in which otherness is sustained and sameness resisted at the level of formal interaction. Competing rhythms demand that the reader embraces the existence not of singular subjects but of hybrid, interwoven and dialogic presences. What emerges in such a space is a version of what Homi Bhabha refers to as the time lag, the spatialized disjunction of temporality that pulls together varying subjectivities and opens the space for marginalized voices. In his work on third space geographies, heavily influenced by Lefebvre's writings, American geographer Edward Soja turns to Bhabha to examine how third space geographies evoke the radical interruptive power of simultaneously real and imagined spaces to interrogate official discourses around space. In Twice Upon a Time, Kunzru's movement through his own third space uncovers rhythms that speak to such subcultural presences. While the text examines the auditory territory of the iPod as one which negatively overrides the city's rhythms and creates the community of one, Kunzru's own walking exposes cross-cultural rhythms of the city's immigrant populations, its street artists, its underground musicians. This positive future is for those that Kunzru refers to as the multitaskers, those who can be both within the technological and the physical space. A series of pages reveal in fragments the varying sounds of the city, from Latin DJs to choir boys, to be brought together thus. All this in 20 minutes, many simultaneous cities, NPR city, college radio city, R&B city, above all the Latino city running in parallel to the Anglo one. Add to that the internet streams and you have a sort of infinite parallelism. Armenian city, Punjabi city, Ethiopian city, Mandarin city, New Age city, ambient city, fairy city, evangelical city, adult contemporary city, single city, sports city, pet city. Moondog has developed his own rhythms through a cross-cultural dialogue, resonant with Lefebvre's corporeal rhythms. Moondog visits a Native American reservation as a child where a chief teaches him this running beat, alongside it the walking beat, which is also the universal heartbeat. So it is that a radically differentiated subject evolves whose own rhythms are produced through and within the radically differentiated rhythms of their spatio-temporal locations. As these rhythms coalesce, it approaches Lefebvre's understanding that a rhythm is slow or lively only in relation to other rhythms, often our own, those of our walking, our breathing, our heart. Rhythm becomes a process of dialogue between competing measures, both human and material. How different then is this rhythm from the movement we might see in a figure such as the 19th century flaneur, one who moves certainly but through a space represented largely as static and with the focus almost entirely on a single subjectivity. Indeed, within the single subject, rhythm is driven towards the resistance of singularity. There is, Lefebvre says, no rhythm without repetition in time and in space, without reprises, without returns. But there is no identical absolute repetition indefinitely, whence the relation between repetition and difference. Like Bhabha's mimicry, in which the repetition of the dominant destabilizes its foundations, rhythm undermines the possibility of a stable referent. On one page of Twice Upon a Time, the narrator recalls a scene of factory women, Spanish love songs on the radio, the machinery whirring and thudding, and observes, "There's something devotional about the tableau, the repetitive gestures, the white uniforms, the plaintive declarations of love." This conjunction of rhythm and subjectivity marks a new 21st century version of Lefebvre's polyrhythmia, but also draws attention to the need to examine Lefebvre's writings on rhythm analysis within the context of his wider thinking around urban space. In Memory Palace too, the disjunctive rhythm of the text forges a path to the other and the disruption of authoritarianism. The narrator's future world has lost the ability to measure. Accounting is the worst crime, and all terms of measurement are forbidden. Yet so too are ideas and imagination. The world of the wilding is one in which only material objects are valued. The horror of the future is thus one in which objects are stripped of their connection to subjectivity. Elsewhere, I have written about this potential of this differentiation for what Edenza terms resistant rhythms. Such alternatives to the rhythms of consumerism, capital, and socially sanctioned schedules and activities can offer unconventional, sometimes utopian visions of different temporalities. At the end of Memory Palace, the narrator is about to die, imprisoned, and a member of the resistance visits him, allowing him the download of one memory onto her consciousness. He chooses a memory of walking with his lover and their dog through the green fields, the moment of anticipation just before they reach the top and see the view. In this moment of hope is the gesture towards a personalised and meaningful movement in which rhythms are shared. Badiou's definition of love as the occupation of the same space as another, with the absorption or loss of individual subjectivity resisted. For Lefebvre, rhythm is a way to oppose linear calculation, with the emphasis instead on the variable duration and length of notes in music as representative of irregular measures. These, however, are not to be confused with the immeasurable. Rhythm is multiplicitous, but it drives us not towards non-place, but to inhabitancy. Equally, texts such as Memory Palace and Twice Upon a Time embrace disjunctive rhythms within the context of meaning. Their mobilities, both literal and metaphorical, are part of a distinct cultural moment. A growing body of work surrounding this moment aims to define its character. For some critics it is post-postmodern, for others a new sincerity. Most recently, such critical positioning has been defined by the term metamodernism. That Lefebvre resonates with such concerns marks the prescience of his writing and its fusion of Marxist and post-structuralist influence. I'm not sure, however, that any of the existing terms are quite right for what Kunzru and Lefebvre offer us. Rather, I would suggest the best way to think about such terms is in relation to what we might call their transglossic properties, the creation of a holistic experience which is defined by a speaking across positions conterminously at formal and thematic levels. While metamodernism defines multimodality and generic hybridity and correlative movement between subject positions as forms of formal and thematic oscillation between modernism and postmodernism, the transglossic repositions such vacillation as a radical simultaneity which refuses the notion of singularity for one of co-presence. It draws our attention to the radical newness of such cultural production, which can be seen in the era of Extinction Rebellion, Me Too and Black Lives Matter, as a vital call to consider what difference our cultural production makes. Such contexts are relevant because, as Atkinson explores in his work on sound ecology, sound rhythms in urban contexts can be a way to take over public space, to claim territory, or to interrogate official usage. The disjunctive and cross-cultural rhythms of Twice Upon a Time and the utopian rhythms of Memory Palace speak to these possibilities. They contribute to what Kevin Hetherington defines as the city as archive, shaped in the process through which rhythms emerge from more abstract noise, a space which provides countercultural content that might interrogate the official archives of the library, map and museum. It is here then that Memory Palace and Twice Upon a Time find themselves once more in overlapping territory, both serving as alternative cultural repositories for memory and experience that offer the opportunity to facilitate new voices. While Twice Upon a Time celebrates the possibilities of the immersive multimodal ebook, the curators of Memory Palace speak of their text as an examining of the material alternative that exists within a context where text has become searchable and interactive, pushing the limits of the material form to explore the idea of an exhibition as a walk-in book. The contrast between digital forms as spreading information and the book as communicative media for slower thoughts, for thinking, itself suggests the alternating rhythms of varying platforms. Reading Memory Palace alongside Twice Upon a Time invites a rhythm analysis not to prioritize one over the other, but to observe how one's corporeal engagement through reading creates a human material rhythm. As I read these books in my southwest London lockdown, the traffic noise, the hammering of a building site outside my window, drilling downstairs, my daughter's laughter on a phone call, my fingers tapping on the keyboard, the movement of my chest, my breath, even reading this PowerPoint now to you. These intersect with the textual rhythms of each piece and are transformed from the hedonistic rhythms of Twice Upon a Time to the slowness of Memory Palace. One text symphonic with my breath, the other in a rhythmic interruption that brings the noises of the street into the room. In these polyrhythmic spaces, we move with and hear an other outside ourselves. Thank you very much.